Hi, and welcome back to the channel Pathways to God and Significance. My name is Michael Venema, and you're watching number 7 in the series, The UnLast Days of Jesus. And the title for number 7 is The Son of God, Abandoned but Not Alone. So we are following Mark's version of Jesus' life. And I'm going to read a fair bit of Mark's actual text, or an English translation of it. And we're also going to be drawing on some of the more ancient prayers or poems in the Bible, and we'll get to that in a little while. But I think we're going to find a very, very interesting connection between some of those ancient prayers and what happened to Jesus Christ. So we're at chapter 15 in Mark's Gospel, and I'm going to be moving some of my pages around now and then. You'll see me doing that, but I'm going to be reading a bit of Mark 15 and then making a few comments about it. Mark 14, which we covered last time, we saw that the enemies of Jesus have been plotting strongly to get rid of him. They have found a key to make their plot work, and the key is that one of his disciples, Judas, agrees to betray Jesus. Then in chapter 14, there's also that what I call the Perfume Incident, where a woman pours perfume on Jesus' head, and Jesus takes this as an opportunity to say that that his burial is coming. In those days, to give a proper, dignified Jewish burial, you would pour perfume on the corpse of the deceased, and this is what this woman was, in a sense, doing while Jesus was yet alive. Jesus also celebrates the Passover meal with his disciples, and this is very significant because the Passover meal was a time, an annual celebration of the first Passover, which the Jewish people remembered when the angel of judgment passed over the residences of the Jewish slaves and went to the regions where the Egyptian slave masters were living, and the Egyptians suffered God's judgment, but the angel of judgment passed over the Jewish people. And this will be a key thing for the early church to reflect on, that Jesus celebrated a Passover meal with his disciples on the night before his death, because in a much more significant sense, God's judgment passes over the people and finds Jesus. So we'll get to that as we go along, but that is a very key thing to understand in understanding how to interpret Jesus' death, what it means, and how the Old Testament, the pre-Jesus stories of the Jewish life and faith pointed to what Jesus accomplished. We also find in chapter 14 that Peter kind of, I think, spontaneously or enthusiastically says, "Oh, Jesus, I will never abandon you." Jesus says, before the night's over, you will deny me 3 times. Jesus goes to Gethsemane, where he prays that the cup of God's judgment will not have to be drunk by him, but Jesus says, "God, your will, not mine." This is also very important. We'll get to this idea of the cup of God's judgment having to be drunk a little bit later on. And we also discover in chapter 14 that the Jewish Leadership Council comes together and they try Jesus, they put him on trial. The witnesses disagree, but nevertheless, the outcome of the trial is already a foregone conclusion that Jesus will be condemned. Peter denies Jesus 3 times, as Jesus predicted. He breaks down and cries. End of chapter 14, now beginning at chapter 15. By the way, in the manuscripts, there are no chapter breaks. It's all one continuous text. There's not even punctuation. The numbers were written into the text many years later to make it easy for people like us to refer to the text and, maneuver around through it. Anyway, here we go with chapter 15. Early in the morning, the chief priests met hurriedly with the elders and the teachers of the Jewish law, the whole council, and they made their plans. They put Jesus in chains, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Why are they handing him over to Pilate? Well, they've made their plans. What do you think those plans might be? They want to do away with Jesus, but Jesus is very popular, so they don't want to earn the wrath of the crowds. They want to find some other way to do away with Jesus. They're going to get Pilate involved in it, and they're going to try to get Pilate to sentence Jesus to death. Pilate is the governor, the Roman governor of the region, and he has the power to have people executed. If the Jewish leadership had themselves sentenced Jesus to death and performed the execution, there was the tradition in the pre-Jesus parts of the Bible of the righteous prophets being terribly mistreated and even hounded to death. And I think that the Jewish leadership does not want the crowds to see their actions, the actions of the Jewish leadership, in that kind of light. They do not want themselves to be seen as the tormentors and the executioners of a righteous prophet. So this is why I think it's very important for them to involve Pilate in the death of Jesus. Anyway, Pilate questions Jesus. He says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answers, kind of cryptically in some translations, "If you say so," in others, "So you say." The chief priests, the Jewish leadership, were accusing Jesus of many things, and so Pilate once again says to Jesus, "Hey Jesus, you're being accused of a lot of things. Listen to these accusations. Don't you have anything to say?" Jesus doesn't say anything. Pilate was amazed. In another translation, Pilate was impressed, really impressed. Anyway, I've mentioned that the Passover meal is being celebrated, and as the text goes on, the story goes on, at every Passover festival, Pilate was in the habit of setting free any one prisoner that the people asked for. At that time, a man named Barabbas was in prison with the rebels who had committed murder in a riot. This was not a terribly unusual thing to happen in those times, that every once in a while an upstart group of devout Jewish men would rebel against their pagan Roman oppressors. Pilate represented those oppressors. Anyway, when the crowd gathered and began to ask Pilate for the usual favor, he asked them, "Well, who do you want me to set free for you? Do you want me to set free for you the King of the Jews?" Because Jesus had sometimes been seen as the appropriate leader sent by God, their king, their leader. Now, it says in the translations that Pilate knew very well that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him purely out of jealousy, or in some translations, out of spite. But the chief priests intervened in this conversation between Pilate and the crowd. They stirred the crowd up and instead asked Pilate to set free Barabbas. And Pilate spoke again to the crowd, "What then do you want me to do with the one who you call the King of the Jews?" And the crowd shouts back, "Crucify him." "But what crime has he committed?" Pilate asks. And the crowd just shouts all the harder, "Crucify him." Now, I don't know if I've ever been involved in a mob situation. I think I was involved in a situation one time where it seemed to be escalating, and it looked like there was kind of a mob mentality happening. And my wife and I were there, and I said, we need to leave here. I think, though, that this is partly what's going on. There's kind of a mob mentality setting in. Anyway, Pilate wants to please the crowd, so what does he do? He frees Barabbas, a known killer. Now, I think this is very interesting because I think through this incident, Jesus, or Mark, is revealing how low the Jewish leadership is taking the crowds, how low they are taking the crowds. They are screaming for the setting free of a known murderer, and they are clamoring for, they're shouting for the crucifixion, the cruel execution of a known good person. This is how far down these leaders are taking their own people. All right, so then Pilate, wanting to please the crowd, has Jesus whipped, and he hands him over to be crucified. I think, if I'm remembering my readings correctly, this was the usual process. I know it sounds terrible to most of our ears, but that the condemned person would first be flogged, would be whipped, and then be handed over for crucifixion. So it's a terrible thing that is happening to Jesus. Anyway, the soldiers are took Jesus inside the courtyard of the governor's palace, and they called together the rest of the company, and so they're going to have some fun with Jesus. They put a purple robe on Jesus, which is a symbol of political or royal authority, and they make a crown for Jesus, the King of the Jews. But what do they make it out of? Thorns. So I don't know if you've ever stepped on a thorn branch or brushed against some thorn bush. In the region where I live, it's quite common to find wild roses, and I don't like walking past them because to me they bite. They seem to dig right into your skin. Anyway, they make for Jesus a crown of thorns, thorny branches, put it on his head. They begin to salute him and make fun of him. Long live the King of the Jews. They beat him over the head while he's got the crown of thorns on with a stick. They spit on him. They fall on their knees and pretend to bow down to Jesus as if he's their king. And when they finished making fun of him, they took off the purple robe and put Jesus' own clothes back on him, and they led him out to crucify him. So we should spend a minute or two just recalling the intensity of Jesus' suffering, the humiliation, the jeering, the name calling, the ridicule, so that the cruelty is very much physical, but it's also psychological and emotional, and I would also say spiritual in the sense that Jesus is being made fun of using a title, the King of the Jews, that has not only political significance for the Jewish people, but a deeply religious understanding. So all these things are being placed upon Jesus, and the suffering is on many levels. So they marched Jesus out to nail him to a cross, which, as you probably know, is what crucifixion is. It's nailing a person through hands, through the feet, to a wooden vertical cross with a vertical piece with a cross member on which the arms are outstretched. You've probably seen many pictures of this kind of thing, and you've probably seen many people wearing crosses, and this is where the wearing of the cross comes from. On the way, as they're leading Jesus out to be crucified, they meet a man named Simon who was coming into the city from the country, and the soldiers forced Simon to carry Jesus' cross. Simon was from Cyrene and was the father of Alexander and Rufus. By the way, this is interesting. Mark is writing for a group of people who he assumes know Alexander and Rufus, and he has to introduce Simon to them, but the readers, Mark presumes, know Alexander and Rufus, the sons of Simon. So this is interesting because it's another little bit that reveals that the eyewitnesses are known. They are there, and these people are known to one another. So the stories of Jesus' death are not created, sometime many years later. They they happened, and the story is understood and told and confirmed many times over by the people who were there and were alive and present then. Anyway, they take Jesus to a place called Golgotha, which means, ominously, the place of the skull. So it's a place of, I think, of regular crucifixion and execution. And there they tried to give Jesus wine mixed with a drug called myrrh, but Jesus would not drink it. Now, I want to pause there for a minute because I mentioned earlier on that Jesus at Gethsemane had asked that this cup that he needed to drink that he would not have to drink it after all, that God would find a way to not have him drink the cup. And so it's interesting, here we have a cup, so to speak, being offered to him, wine mixed with a drug, and that was to ease the pain for the victim. Jesus refuses it. So by Jesus doing this, he's giving us something to think about. And what he's giving us to think about is the fact that Jesus has agreed to drink the cup of God's judgment, God's wrath against sin. He's going to drink it, and he's not drinking some other cup, to ease the burden. He's carrying it out to the full. Jesus is drinking from a cup, but it's not a cup of a mixture of drugs meant to ease the pain. Okay, then they crucified him. They divided his clothes among themselves, throwing dice to see who would get which piece of clothing. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The notice of the accusation against him said, "The King of the Jews." Again, I don't think Pilate really thinks that Jesus is a King of the Jews, but he's having this sign placed over the dying man as a way to ridicule Jesus. The people passing by shook their heads, and they hurled insults at Jesus. "Aha! You were going to tear down the temple and build it back up in 3 days?" Which I discussed in a previous video. "Now, Jesus, come down from the cross and save yourself." And in the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law made fun of Jesus, saying to one another, "He saved others, but he can't save himself. Let's see the Messiah, God's chosen leader, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now, and then we will believe in him." And the two also who were crucified with Jesus, 2 other convicted criminals, also insulted Jesus. All right, I'm going to stop there. I was going to continue on for a while, but I want to stop there because we are going to look at I mentioned a couple of poems, a couple of prayers in the pre-Jesus parts of the Bible, which, as it turns out, looked ahead to what was happening to Jesus. And I'll refer to these again in the next video in number 8. But here, listen to some of these things where in this Psalm 22 is the poem I'm looking at. So in part of the poem, people are ridiculing the writer, and this is what's happening. "All who see me make fun of me. They stick out their tongues and shake their heads. You relied on the Lord, on God, they say. Why doesn't he save you? If the Lord likes you, why doesn't he help you?" Wow, well, aren't these thoughts echoed totally in what's happening to Jesus as he's being ridiculed and he's being taunted, and why don't you come down from the cross? Why doesn't God save you? "Many enemies surround me like bulls. They are all around me. They're roaring. They're tearing at me. My strength is gone. My bones are out of joint. My heart is like melted wax, bones out of joint." When a victim was hanging on the cross, his bones would go out of joint because you're suspended by just your hands and your feet. It's a terrible thing. "My throat is as dry as dust, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. My bones can be seen." So Jesus is hanging there, and his ribs, can be seen, no doubt, through his. He hasn't got any clothing on at this point anymore. And listen to this. "My enemies look at me and they stare, and they gamble for my clothes. They divided among themselves." This also, as we see, is happening to Jesus himself. So we're going to look at that psalm once again in number 8, and we're also going to look at Psalm 69, but we're going to see how powerfully these images of the chosen leader of God suffering in the Psalms, how those images, those words, those prayers find their home, their fulfillment in Jesus. All right, so I think we're going to end it there. There's a fair bit more to take care of as we look at the death of Jesus and what happened afterwards, which will not be a surprise to some of you, but maybe to some of you. I hope that some of you who are listening, that all this is fairly new to you. So I hope that's been a big help. I will see you in the next video. Please don't forget to like and share and subscribe and all those good things. It means a lot to me. Thank you. Bye for now.